Today, me and Jordan talked about, no, man, it was weird. Gosh, man, why are these so weird?
I did it first try, that's all I'm saying.
Today, me and Jordan talked about questions from an unbeliever, questions that I've been asked and he's been asked. We got some in throughout the week and some in from the live stream. It was awesome. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Discussions with Jordan. We have the time and a topic, so let's talk about it. I've been working on a catchphrase. Can you tell? Did you like that, Levi? We have the time and a topic, so let's talk about it. Yeah, okay. I'll keep working on it. Before we jump into it, you can follow, like, and subscribe to all the places that will help us get this to the people that would benefit from it. And usually I introduce the guest with, some funny banter and something creative, but I didn't. So, Mr. Jordan Weaver. Clap, Levi, please. Thank you. Jet, can you clap too? No, okay, there you go.
We literally have my kids
Yeah,
clapping me in.
yeah. That's
What's
fine.
up?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm actually in a really unusually good mood.
Really?
I am. Nope,
Why?
I am.
Because it's windy?
I think I was just listening to Wu-Tang and it just kind of got me pumped.
Okay, yeah, it has that effect on people.
It is.
The topic today. Do you want to know it?
We're eventually going to have to get to it.
Yeah, okay. Questions from a unbeliever.
We just lost power on this camera.
We just lost power on the camera, everyone. Everything's fine.
Everybody.
1 second.
We'll be right back, all right.
We're back.
I know what happened.
What happened?
I said I was in a good mood and it just shifted the dynamic around.
Literally,
here.
Levi touched the camera and a spark went off and then the camera went dead. That was weird.
That or because I said Wu-Tang.
Yeah, one of the two. Questions from an unbeliever.
Yes.
That's the topic today.
Yes.
So I just gathered them from people and the internet.
I like it.
First one is, how do I know God is real? Yeah.
Well, okay. So I think we're as people, I don't know how deep to go into this. First of all, how do you define proof? Because one of the things that Jesus said in the New Testament that I think is so awesome is he said that he indicates that unbelief is an active thing and it can consume in the same way that belief can. Mm-hmm. Belief says, I've settled on something and I believe that. And as things come in that look to oppose that, I'm going to dig deeper until I find the truth. And that's kind of a confirmation bias, that kind of stuff. So when people set their hearts against the possibility of there being a God, then there's nothing you can do to convince someone who's like, no, I just don't believe that to be possible. There's no sense even trying. And I would encourage church people or believers to go, hey, that's not the time to engage at a philosophical level. That's the time to engage at a love, relational, personal, just be present in someone's life. Because if somebody has made up their mind on something, then you're not going to convince them because unbelief is same as belief. It's an active, I can take all, because here's the other thing. If you don't believe something, no matter how much proof is given, it's kind of like watching a magician. I know there's no such thing as magic, but when I watch a magician, I watch something that I don't understand, but you're not changing my belief. You're just changing the way that I'm taking in information. And you see what I mean? Yeah. That's the challenge is like, how do I take in this information, even knowing that magic isn't real? How do I explain what I'm seeing? Right. See what I mean? So my unbelief in magic, disproving.
Okay.
So I think at a philosophical level, somebody's open-minded to go, hey, I'm open to the possibility. Then you have to at least start to consider what it means to believe in things that are intangible in the first place. Mm-hmm. Is love something? Is fear something? Is faith something? And you go, okay, if you can get through that, then you go to, why is there anything instead of nothing? Mm-hmm. Because every theory of how we came to be where we are right now starts with the existence of something in the first place. Mm-hmm. But then I think the Bible leaves the door open for some interpretation on that too, because what was the first, we've talked about this, what was the first miracle that Jesus performed? Physically in his physical ministry, what was the first recorded miracle that he performed? I'm asking you the question.
Okay.
I'm conducting this interview, Jacob. He turned water into wine.
That's what I was going to say.
Well, the thing we know about wine is that to get good wine takes time. The best wine takes time.
Right.
And so what Jesus did at a physical level that is kind of like, in my mind, kind of a wink to the whole is there a God? Is there not a God? The whole kind of a wink that we get from Jesus is his first miracle was creating something old in an instant. He took something and created something old in an instant, right? So when people are debating like the science behind the age of the planet, the science indicates something that we seem to sort of concrete understand that would seem to discredit the Bible. My point is, as we're trying to unpack this open-minded concept, we see that things exist. Why is there something instead of nothing at a giant philosophical existential level? But then also, isn't it possible that as we're sorting this out, that what we see is that God created something old on the time frame that he gave us? You know, like I would love to be so open-minded in my belief as to go, I don't know, what if the dinosaurs were not dinosaurs? What if they were literally skeletons put on a planet to indicate an old age that was created in a moment?
Yeah.
See, so when you're, in my mind, when you're considering how do you know there's a God, in my mind, I want to leave the door open to just kind of unpack all aspects of it. Instead of settling on belief or unbelief, how do you open-mindedly just sort of walk through the possibilities?
Right. That makes sense.
It's more fun too, because then you're not in a debate. Everything is like, I don't know, let's talk about that. What would that look like? Because I think when a lot of times Christians get accused of being science deniers. And man, what a unfortunate position to be put in as a Christian to go, I'm not a science denier. I would like to think I'm open-minded enough to try to take in all of it.
Right. Yeah. Let's have a discussion about it rather than just hide ourselves from the world. Do all religions lead to the same place?
Ooh, probably. Yeah, I think so. For everybody who just had a heart attack, let me clarify. When you look at a religion, the structure of a religion is there's an enlightened leader that has reached this elevated position, and he gives the rules and the how-tos of how to arrive in the position that he's in. That's kind of how religion works.
Right.
When you look at what Jesus did, Jesus was not the enlightened one that came and told us how to do it. Jesus came and did it for us and gave it to us free of charge, which kind of untangles what we believe religion to be. So if we're not careful, what happens is we turn it back into rules, and we turn what Jesus did back into a religion rather than a free gift, a concept of mercy and grace and law all wound into one. Every other religion follows the same pattern, and I think that's why we have to be so careful to go, I think all religions probably do lead to a self-help, some sort of enlightenment, a better existence, living more at peace with people. I mean, right. I think every religion to some degree probably tries to bring people to a better plane of humanity. But that's why when the Bible says no man comes to the Father except through Jesus, that's why. Because it's not through a religious practice. It's not through a religious set of exercises. It's literally in relationship to the Father, and not a self-reliance, but a God-reliance. And then for that reason, it makes religions really interesting to study. I think like listening to yogis talk is so fascinating because there's so much truth to what they just discussed. The Muslims, the Buddhists, the Hindus, everybody's got something that is fascinating that you can listen to and go, man, there is maybe an improved method of discipline to live by. But as far as salvation, as far as like a contact with God, I think that's why the story of Jesus is so unique, is it operates in complete converse to what we see your religion being.
So religion is man-made?
I don't know, because if it's what deconstructs, we're good. If it's what deconstructs the message of Jesus, then maybe it's not all man-made. Maybe there's maybe people are a conduit to a lie or a deception from the enemy. And I don't like talking about the devil, because if this is a message to unbelievers, they're like, what? A devil? Think of it more as like a force at work to distract from the truth. And if I wanted to turn something that was going 180 miles an hour down the highway, I wouldn't turn it into a 180 because that's too hard. I would just deviate slowly. And anything that deviates from the message of what Jesus says. And that's what's crazy, is that most of the time when people are like, well, I just can't get my mind around a God who would fill in the blanks. The truth is, most of what they say, I agree with. Because what they're saying is a God that says what you say he says, but then also a God of religion don't go together. Like there's a kind of an intellectual incapacity to balance a God of love and a God of investment and a God of engagement with this religion of throw people out and expect them to earn their way back.
Right.
They don't line up. And so even people outside of the church, they go, I just can't get there. And to which I would say most of the time, like, that's That's why who Jesus was is so vital to understanding the rest of the Bible.
Yeah. If God is so good, why is there so much suffering? And I know that's a big one.
You ready for that? Yeah, you springing that one on me.
Yeah.
Define. You're gonna have to bat this back and forth with me for a minute, okay?
I got you.
Define suffering. First of all, there's a few parts to this.
Okay.
If you break your arm, is that suffering?
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
If you lose a loved one, is that suffering?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that good or is that bad?
Well, I guess people would think that was bad.
I mean, obviously, but what do you measure that against? Because if I'm driving down the road and I'm going 85 miles an hour and a cop pulls me over and says, what you've done is bad, he's basing that on an infraction against the law that was written on behalf of humanity. Everything that we determine to be bad or evil is measured against humanity. So what we're saying is humanity carries a certain amount of value, and suffering is an offense to the value of humanity. Mm-hmm. Are you tracking with me?
Okay.
So how could a God of love allow suffering? Well, you're saying that suffering is unjust and that it's unfair and it's unwarranted because people are so valuable.
Okay.
Still with me?
Yeah.
And I'm hoping we get some questions back because whatever I don't cover, I'm hoping people will help me clarify whatever I don't think to mention. But what Jesus did was he came in and he created a value for humanity that a lack of suffering couldn't have created. Like in a perfect utopian, no suffering, that wouldn't have created more value for humanity than what Jesus did on an eternal scale. Mm-hmm. So if you think of people who are, this is probably part of the sermon. You're getting a little bit of the sermon. If you look at the end game, do the ends justify the means? And what I mean by that is no suffering begats what? If you live a life of no suffering, what is the end result? And without exception, suffering, the lack of suffering creates a lesser version of a person.
Okay.
Going through suffering and experiencing those moments, and this is the thing about all religions to some degree, I would agree that a season of suffering brings out a flavor or a richness to life that we couldn't have experienced. And the best people that we know, the deepest, most selfless, most loving, most engaged people are people that have gone through hardships and thus understand the value or the reality of mankind, right? So the end game is actually enhanced through moments of suffering. But then beyond the end game, the end is a life spent in the presence of God, which is what Jesus created. And so a God of love, it's a bigger picture than why am I suffering in this moment. When you say, I don't deserve to suffer like this, you are placing a value on yourself that says, I shouldn't be experiencing this. I don't deserve this. Well, if there's no God, then what scale is there? What makes us so right to accuse the circumstances?
Right.
You're suffering. Well, why is that wrong or why is that bad? Unless God exists, unless God placed a value on humanity, there's nothing by which to measure the suffering of man. It's not just or unjust. It just is. It just is. It just is.
Right. Interesting.
I'm really glad I had an answer for that question because that's hard.
No, that's
a hard one.
Yeah. I was like, hey, I hope I told you the topic and then, hey. Paige asks, what should I tell a non-believer about God?
What if you were to show them rather than tell them? Because I don't know about you, but we are so geared towards sales. Our nation, being a capitalistic society, our nation runs on sales, and sales is motivated by fear. Right. And so fear is created by lack. Lack is created by I'm right, you're wrong. That's a very off-putting concept. So when people start trying to sell Jesus, then instantly they go into a sales mode, and it's just a natural reaction to living in this culture. It's what we see every day. Right. So what I would encourage, I heard a guy say one time, he's a psychologist. He said, you are capable of loving someone so well, they will eventually ask you why.
Yeah.
Why do you love me? And it doesn't seem like you want anything else out of it. They will come to you and go, who is Jesus? They just won't say it that way. They'll go, why?
Right.
Well, then you get to explain the source. I don't need anything back. This isn't a capitalistic venture where I says, I'm going to love you, but I want something back. This isn't a, what's it called? The exchange. I'm not doing this for my own gain. I'm doing this from an overflow of what Jesus has done in my life. And so if you want to know more, I'll tell you. Otherwise, you don't have to expect that this goes anywhere. Mm-hmm. There's no agenda. So what do you tell people about Jesus? When they ask you, that's when you know it's time.
Okay. That's good. Yeah. I was wondering the same thing about, if you have a friend or, a loved one who is living a different path, you kind of, legalism takes over and makes you think that you have an obligation to tell them and to communicate versus it feels weird because you're like, I don't want to offend them and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so what do you do? Do you honestly just wait until they ask you?
Let me answer it this way. I'm a small government guy as far as church is concerned. You need a program, you need a curriculum, you got to have a teaching, you got to go through all this, you got to go through all that. I'm like, no. Small government in rural communities, let them manage themselves, and they go, well, how are you going to control them? I'm like, well, your thousands of rules weren't going to control them either. Right. So how could you not feel a burden for somebody? How could you not feel a burden for somebody that you felt like was far from God or that would benefit from a relationship? How could you not feel a burden?
Right.
But either approach is still left up to them to make the decision. And so if you overdo it, then you run the risk of losing the relationship. If you undersell it and you just love them, and in the end they don't accept Jesus, you still haven't severed the relationship in the process. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're seeing actually in rural communities right now. They would love to have a church that's ran by the community, that's taught the word, that doesn't have to follow you got to sign our membership and you got to go through this class and go through that class and you have to agree to this and agree to that. People are like, I just want to know who Jesus is. Mm-hmm. And so if you take that same concept and go at a personal level, the more you're able to just love people at a genuine level and not look for a return. Because I think the other thing is we become so evangelical in our outreach. And every time somebody gets saved, we're like, and then we just leave that person alone.
Right.
It's like, well, that's not what Jesus is teaching us. Jesus isn't teaching us to run around tallying marks about who we could get to make some sort of commitment out of fear. Mm-hmm. If I only am called to just love who I'm in contact with, and Valerie earlier just said, and pray for him. That's exactly right. If there's a burden that is just so overwhelming, pray for him. Yeah. Because what I've found is that you can't help but love people that you are praying for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's one I get from unbelievers. And I know I'm asking you, I'm putting the ball in the tee for myself with this one, but the other one was, why was the apple present in the garden?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because why would God, if God's a good God, then why was the apple in the garden? And because it kind of goes along with that. How does God allow suffering? I heard a guy say one time, separate from church, that he had a pet bird and this pet bird loved him. And his friend goes, open the window.
Yeah.
How can you say that you are in a relationship with something that has no choice? Mm-hmm. And so what God was doing by leaving the window open, God was not condemning mankind. God was condemning himself because he knew what Jesus would have to do on behalf of mankind when he put the apple. So whatever the reason would be, it came at more of a cost to him than to us. See, because we could just disappear off the face of the planet. It doesn't make him any less God. And so his efforts were 100% altruistic on our behalf, because if he would have just wiped us off the face of the planet, when was the last time you stepped on an ant on the sidewalk and then thought about it ever again?
Yeah.
And that's a measurable difference between an ant and a human being. God is immeasurably that much better than we are.
Right.
So God to wipe us off the planet, the only thing we could have accused him of being was just. But when he goes to the cross for us, we can say that he is just, but now we can say that he's merciful. How could God have been merciful to something that never had a choice in the first place? So a believer or an unbeliever makes no difference. At least to understand what it is that we say we believe helps. Because I think if you were to ask that question to the average person that's kind of going through the motions of a religion, they'd go, I don't know. Fair enough. But it's worth at least asking the question.
Right. I got a question personally a while ago about, if you follow Jesus, do you have to only listen to worship music? Basically, essentially saying, do you have to give up things you enjoy?
Anytime you turn something into a rule, it brings just death, right? I started the podcast by saying I was listening to Wu-Tang. So I think I've already answered the question, but at the same time, I want to leave the door open that if I feel like God's really kind of ushering me back into a season of just cut out the distractions, then if I've made it a rule, then I go to that rule and I go, I don't have to do that.
Right.
Okay, well then you only listen to worship. Well, that's a rule again.
Right.
One of the things, actually, I don't know, I guess it's okay to say, one of the things I miss about other places in the world when we live in Central Oregon is I miss culture.
Yeah.
We have white culture. We have a lot of white people, but I miss culture. And so there are times where a music or a food or a movie or something. It's like you're getting to, because I've sat in rooms with people where I'm the only white person in the room and listen to them tell stories or play music or talk about food or talk about their, their ancestors and things like that. And I love that. I love feeling like that I'm getting a view into someone else's life. And so if you limit yourself to only worship music, you're also cutting out like cultural connections to people that are different or that look different or that sound different or that have a different perspective on life.
Right.
I was listening to a guy this week talk about, it was a rap song, and he was explaining to me about the story of listening to, and I won't say the rapper's name because he has a lot of stuff you really shouldn't listen to, but he was talking about his story of growing up in the ghetto and how it was telling the story. So he's explaining to me the lyrics of this song, and it's not a song that I would have understood unless you have it explained. So, I mean, to turn something into a rule takes the life out of that concept.
Right. Does that go into living in the world but not of the world?
Yeah, I remember one time going to a youth conference and they were like, these artists, I'll never forget, it was called Acquire the Fire. I'm calling you out. Acquire the Fire. And I'm sure it did a lot of good. I'm sure a lot of kids made a lot of commitments to not ever have sex before marriage and then couldn't live up to it.
Right.
Not that I... You promise? You promise you won't? Okay. You're like 12. You're like, okay, all right. You're like, here, sign this. Okay. Promise, God. Yeah. Anyway, it was one of those.
Okay.
But he was saying like these artists, they get under the influence of these drugs and alcohol, and the devil takes control of their spirit. And where do you think this music is coming from? And I was like, the devil. And yeah. And that their point was like, you got to run and
run away.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I also want to stay sensitive to the Holy Spirit, that if I'm in the middle of listening to something that I suddenly am like,
I've had those times where it's
absolutely.
like, absolutely.
Because the thing is, there's probably some truth to that. There probably are some dark things that are being, okay. I have a friend yesterday. He was telling me yesterday that when he was working with the CIA, that they were working on sound frequencies that had a direct connection to your brainwaves. Ready for this?
Okay.
He's got it on a thumb drive. He's going to bring it to me. I'll share it to you.
I don't want to listen to it.
Yeah, you do.
Okay,
you
I do. I really do.
He said the sound, this is back in the 60s. That's why it was released. It was declassified. So who knows what they have now. But these sound waves are designed to interact with your brain in such a way that creates a certain emotion. And he goes, I thought it was complete BS. He's telling me this. I thought it was BS. He goes, I listened to it. Sounds like chirps and fuzzy sounds, but you have to have it in headphones. You can't do it subliminally. And it's like you have to. And he said the one that was created to bring about fear, he said, I couldn't get through it.
Oh, dude, what?
Yep. So listen to this. If you break down an atom, they don't know what an atom is made out of.
Right.
If you have a tablespoon of ocean water, there's more atoms in the tablespoon than there are tablespoons of water in the ocean. Whew. Right? They don't know what an atom is made of. And it's an interesting research. And I'm an idiot. I don't know the science behind all this. But what I do know is that the reason we've had such a difficult time with the atom is we don't know what it's made of. But there is a theory that an atom, the material that an atom is made up of is a sound wave. So think about that. What that would mean
voice
then.
Of God.
Well, think about that. It says that God spoke things into existence.
Right.
And so the foundational matter that makes up creation is the voice. It was a sound. And so if that's the case, then you look back, going back to the original topic of like, you can be listening to a song and like out of nowhere, you're like, oh, this.
Yeah. Interesting.
But if you're not aware of that and you've made a rule out of it, you're like, no, I'm going to keep listening because I don't want to be one of those stuck up Christians.
Right.
I also think the same is true. I remember one time we went to like a Christian concert because those are the only ones we're allowed to go to. Russ and Hannah. And my brother was like very legalistic. He'll tell you this story. I'm not telling you anything he wouldn't tell you. He's like very like, you follow the rules and the rules this and rule. I mean, he was into it. And he had this one band. He was like kind of dipping his toe in the music thing and stuff. And so he's kind of intrigued. And the band walked by and they all smell like weed. And he was like, what? You're a Christian band. So the fact that you're singing worship songs does not even guarantee that there's a connect. So I don't know. I just don't like making something into a rule that allows me to turn off my spirit. That's kind of like always supposed to be.
Well, and everybody, people have their thing that they struggle with, so if you're around somebody that, struggles with, I don't know, rap music or whatever, worship music even, it's like you don't want to play that with them because you're hitting their thing.
Well, and what about this? What about like a song comes on from when you were in high school and it takes you back to like kind of that headspace that you were in? Like there is power in it,
sure,
for sure. But I don't think it needs to be like only this or only that.
rule.
Just a sensitivity to it.
Sure.
But that goes back to the existence of God. How do you explain moments that are like, okay, something's happening here?
Yeah.
How do you explain that if there's not? And I mean, you could argue that it's the brain waves or it's just biology, but you're still not accounting for why is there biology in the first place.
Yeah. We kind of touched on this with the making something old,
Okay.
new, or, right now, but evolution or creation.
What if God created an evolved earth in a moment?
Yeah.
I mean,
Because then you can't argue that. I mean,
it says he made land, but it doesn't say what it looked like. What
Right.
if he created an evolved land that was old in an instant? And I'm not saying that's what it is, but if I'm creative enough to consider that as a possibility and God is limitless, who knows? And it seems like the only time people are like, no, the Bible says a day, it was a day. They're looking for an argument. Anytime somebody's like, no, it's 6 million years old or billion or whatever. I don't like the argument of it. If somebody wants to sit around a table and like put thoughts out there, to me, that's the one that makes the most sense. Is that God created an evolved earth in a moment.
yeah. Did you, maybe you can explain it, or just, I want to know your thoughts on it, but I've heard the thought that the period of time where it says, day 1, day 2, that kind of thing, the word day can be translated back to a period of time. So I've heard that they can't even track back that a 24-hour period, but what have you thought?
Well, and I'm always really careful not to take and insert the possibilities beyond the parameters. And what I mean by that is if it says a day, I don't have a hard time. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I don't have any harder time believing a 24-hour day or a million-year day. Both are equal. So why not just take it at face value?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel, because people are like, well, do you think that it was actually the belly of a whale, or do you think that was metaphorical? I'm like,
Right.
well, if I believe that God is who he says he is, why is it so much harder to believe one than the other?
Right.
If it is metaphorical, does it change if it was physical or not? Like, to me, I believe that it was literal. I believe it's written out as a literal story, but if it was told as a metaphor, what difference does that make? Jesus told parables all the time of people that weren't necessarily real people, but it was a story. And so I believe it to be true.
Yeah.
But if somebody were to go, well, I believe it's metaphor, do we get the same thing out of it?
Yeah, that's true.
Still words on the page that help us to understand the depth of what's being told.
Yeah. There's no difference.
Right.
I mean, you believe one way, then you believe another.
Absolutely.
Best book to read if you want to get a glimpse of who Jesus is, but don't want to read the Bible.
God-Shaped Brain by Timothy Jennings.
Okay, there you go.
Here's why. He talks about the shape of God. And that's the reason Jesus, to me, Jordan, that's why Jesus was so important, is he was people-shaped.
Right.
We can look at something, because like if I were to say what is the personality of the Holy Spirit, it gets real kind of nebulous-y, right? And like God the Father, real nebulous, like what does God look like? And like, Jesus was so specifically important because he gave us a shape. Now, if you can take the word and put God into the shape of love instead of the shape of fear, and you start translating the Bible according to what is love, then now I will say he gets into some stuff that's kind of like, is the day of a million years, is the day that, like, he takes some creative liberties that it doesn't bother me. I just can't verify that that's true.
Right.
And so, I love the book because it talks about the physical response that our physical bodies have in moments of love versus moments of fear.
Yeah.
And I love the clarity on who Jesus is at a personality level. Because it opens the rest of the word. Because there are times you read something in the Bible and it's like, what?
Yeah.
If my friends read this,
seriously.
but you dig and what you find, Mindy, it is A God-Shaped Brain by Timothy Jennings, and you can get it on audiobooks. That's how I know it's good. Because if it was on paper, I would have never read it.
We don't read. We can only listen.
Lacey says that I'm ear reading.
Yeah.
So, what was I going to say with that? Yeah, I don't know.
Something popped into my head. Do you think, worship music, they have, it has a vibe, right? A similar vibe.
Okay.
And then going back to the
Are we talking worship music or are we talking Christian music?
worship.
Okay.
So
I'm a fan of worship.
Right.
I like worship.
So, that kind of vibe, right? So then going back to the CIA note type of thing.
Okay.
Do you think that kind of like opens up certain parts of us, that music?
Yeah. Maybe not to the degree that you're asking.
Okay.
I think there's something in our spirit that is triggered by what if you think of the anointing as being oil, and there's so many thousands of different ways to go with this, I just mean the presence of God. If we believe that things take place beyond what is physically, like dog whistle moments where something's happening, but you're not consciously responding, I think that the atmosphere of worship in that room as it's being recorded translates, and it just travels. And every time you listen to it, but the same is true about a sermon. Like if God really lays it on my heart, something that I understand and I preach it, every time you watch that video, the heart of God that was in that moment translates. Mm-hmm. So to a large degree, yes. That's also why we're really careful with the atmosphere here on days that we're recording, is because the atmosphere is somehow captured. I don't know how to express it, but it's almost like a smell test. People turn it on and they can smell what's going on even if they couldn't consciously explain it.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think worship carries a lot of that. Christian music, maybe, but maybe to not the same degree.
The Christians I know are all hypocrites.
Okay.
I guess that's not really a question, but it's one of those things where, like you've said before.
Well, yeah. And I think according to religion, that statement carries a tremendous amount of weight, because we have this enlightened leader. He's given us the rules, and if you follow the rules, you improve. Mm-hmm. Okay. Somebody comes in and goes, well, if that's true, why am I ahead of you on the scale? Mm-hmm. And how do you argue with that? My grandpa, he used to love to say, like, well, if a hypocrite is what's standing between you and God, then the hypocrite's still closer to God than you. And like, I don't know if that's really what people are looking for. Right. It's like the gal that's like, look at all these different eggs. You crack them open, they're all the same color. This is what racism is. And someone's like, oh my gosh, you solved racism, right? Like I get it, but it takes more than that. It's got to have more depth than that. One of the things about the burning bush in the Old Testament with Moses was not the superiority of the bush. It wasn't about this spectacular, amazing bush that was so deserving of the presence of God that God had no choice but to settle on it. Mm-hmm. The amazing thing was what God was doing in that moment, and that the bush stayed pretty much exactly the same. And so in my life, what I try to do is I try to teach and I try to live that it's not about my elevated position, because that's what a hypocrite is. A hypocrite is somebody who says one thing and does the other. What I try to do is I try to look at Jesus the best I can, and any imperfections that I exhibit, I try to own them first. Mm-hmm. But what that makes me is it's accountable to what it is that I feel called to present. Mm-hmm. I don't feel called to present perfection. I never have. And the minute you go down the road of like, well, I'm a pastor, so here's what I do, then you've turned it. The focus is not on Jesus. Now people are looking for your flaws. Mm-hmm.
We have another question in from actually sometime during the week. So I'm going to read it, but forgive me if I stumble on my words.
I'm ready.
So 2 Christians marry, then divorce because of verbal and emotional abuse. Are they free to remarry other people? No unfaithfulness, both believers. The Bible seems black and white on the topic of marriage, divorce, remarriage. But then you have situations like King David having many wives and also being a man after God's own heart.
The reason, in my opinion, that God said one man, one wife in the New Testament is this. Involuntary celibates are dangerous people. What I mean by that is young men who cannot get a wife because they don't have the money, they don't have the power, they don't have the influence, they don't have the resources. Young ladies that are looking for provision. Okay, so this is worst case scenario. If one powerful, wealthy person, one man, has the ability and the right to marry all these women, then women are going to marry into a situation for security instead of love. Mm-hmm. It's going to leave young men who are incapable of producing a life valuable enough to get a wife. They get so mad at the game, they tip over the table, right? And so what you see is a lot of times the inequity of men and women, they speak different languages. So you have this one guy, this powerful guy that comes in and he's making all the money and can provide all the provisions. Then he's marrying people, but they don't feel loved, women that don't feel loved, relationships that don't feel loved. So just at a rational level, that one makes sense to me.
Right.
As far as the divorce, man, I tell you what, it is a rule. It is very clear. It is very cut and dried that if you get a divorce and you remarry, you're committing adultery. But if you have a lustful thought, you also are. If you're mad at a brother, you're same as murder. I mean, there's a million rules that Jesus said you can't live up to it.
Right.
And what happens if Jesus is like, yeah, well, except if there's verbal abuse. If there's verbal abuse, no big deal. Well, what is verbal abuse? I mean, there are people that have varying degrees of that. And so, yes, it's a rule. Yes, it is clear. No, it's not unforgivable. The idea is not that you follow a set of rules to an enlightened place of superiority. Mm-hmm. So what Jesus is saying is that, no, there's not a situation by which divorce is ever good for anybody. But that doesn't disqualify you, because he also says that if you have a lustful thought, you've committed adultery. Well, what are you supposed to do with that?
Right.
Okay, I'm guilty, but now what?
Right.
What's the road towards redemption? If there's no road towards redemption, then we need to just all stop right now.
Right.
So, no, I don't think there's a scenario by which God's like, divorce?
Good. Yeah.
Because he's mercy, but he is the rules. In the beginning, the Word was with God, the Word was God. So that means Jesus is the rules. Yeah. He is also the fulfillment of the rules. So no, there's not a means by which you can marry and divorce and not break the rules. You are. But so is a million other things. Why is that one our favorite one to pick on?
Read that one.
Okay, it says, what's your feeling on the statement, those people are good, God-fearing people I never understood because I never wanted to fear God? Thad, the Bible says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's where wisdom begins. But wisdom is not a portal. You don't walk through it, bam, wise. Wisdom is a process. It's like if I was going to walk from here to my house, I know where I'm going, and maybe every step I'm getting closer, but I'm not there just because I've started that direction, right? So it doesn't say that the fear of the Lord is the arrival at wisdom. It says that's where you start. So as you're looking at all these different roads, fear is the only, apart from God, fear is our only motivator that makes any sense. You take God out of the equation, all we have left is fear, because now it's all about survival.
Right.
Love cannot exist without God. And the reason love can't exist without God, first, God is love, but second of all, we are literally in survival, and it is power, and it is everything that the world offers as far as survival of our situation, protection, things like that. So it says the beginning of wisdom, it says of all the things that you're afraid of, God is the one that controls the things you should be ultimately afraid of. So in that moment of like, if I'm going to be afraid of everything, God is the thing that is the source of everything I'm afraid of. I need to head that direction. I need to start walking towards him. The beginning, the first step towards wisdom is the fear of the Lord. But then it also says, perfect love drives out
all fear.
All fear.
Right.
So the closer you get to God, the more you realize that the things that you were afraid of are started to fall off. And it says that fear has to do with punishment. So the closer you get to God, the less you're focused on punishment, the less you're focused on the rules and breaking the rules. And if I get married or remarried, am I get fear? That's all fear. The closer you get to God, the more you begin to lean into the rules, and you get to a place like where David's like, I love the law. I love the law because it's an indicator of what God intends for me. I love it. I'm not worried about the punishment. You know, like that's what Jesus was saying. The words I've spoken over you, that's the salvation of mankind. Not what Jesus said, what Jesus did. So the fear of God is the beginning. It's the first step on a long path, but it is not, the fear of the Lord is not the completion of wisdom. It's where it starts. It's not where it ends.
Interesting.
Because if it says, if perfect love drives out all, A-L-L, all fear, how can you say, well, God expects you to be afraid of him because that's wisdom? Well,
Yeah.
it's incomplete.
Well, this is the last one I got. So if you got questions you want to ask this week, then get them in while you can. What happens when I die? And I know that can be that. I mean, like, you know.
No, I know.
Okay.
When I was a little kid, I'd be in the back seat and I would go to sleep because my dad was driving.
You're right.
There was no part of me that felt like I needed to be in control of that process. My dad drives. I don't drive. I'm tired. Go to sleep. The older I've gotten, the more I become self-reliant just as an adult. I can't sleep in a vehicle because I feel like I have to be like every time somebody turns like wrecking.
Right. Yeah.
The specifics as far as, like it says at the rapture, the dead in Christ will be raised from the dead first. And like, there's a lot of things that I just really haven't gotten into.
Okay.
On that one specifically, I'm sleeping in the back seat.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know that God's got it. And so as far, I don't know. I don't have any control.
Yeah.
I don't have any amount of authority in that. None. So I guess I don't know.
Whatever it
yeah,
is.
it just has never piqued my curiosity because how do I prove what I believe? And then what do I do about it?
Yeah.
I just sleep in the back seat, I guess. I don't know. But that allows me a certain amount of freedom in the way I live.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm going to die. I am curious if I'm going to die young. I've always thought I would. Really, but at the same time, like, it's just not something I have to obsess about. I don't know. I really don't know.
Interesting.
I heard a guy one time, this isn't your question, but I heard a guy one time, he's an EMT, and he said he's been on the scene a lot of times when people were going to die. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
It's imminent. And they go, am I going to die? And he goes, the moment of honesty where you say, yes, there's a peace. You expect it to be a panic, like, oh, no, I'm going to die. But it's because the ultimate question, the question that we all have, like, what will it be? How will it end? How will I die? It's been answered. And the minute it's been answered, they're like, this is it. Interesting. You know, there's almost like a peace, the acceptance of this is it. And so I would like to think that I almost have a little bit of that already, or I try to. I live as though this is it. And then if it's not, bonus.
Yeah. I mean, because, I mean, I'd be interested in any theological studies or something about, because I mean, what is heaven? It seems so,
here's what it won't
heady.
be. It won't be what we think of it as being. Neither will hell.
Right.
Because it's at a different dimension. We think of everything in the dimension that we're in. It will not be the dimension that we're in right now.
Yeah. And that's so weird to think about, of like, what is heaven? You won't get it.
Well, and it's gonna be in every single way better. Because everything that we think of now that produces joy or happiness in our life, God created. So imagine a God, that same God, creating something without the tension of struggle.
Right.
And I honestly think everybody's like, oh, the best part of heaven's going to be God. And as a kid, I'm like, or the water slides, you know?
Yeah.
But the older I get, I think I understand that concept of, like, it's not going to be the dimension that we understand. It's going to literally be this God concept that we couldn't have even fathomed.
Yeah.
Same is true of hell. There's a theory that I really like, that nobody goes to hell that didn't choose it. There will be nobody in hell that didn't choose it. I would rather do it my own way. I'd rather live with the consequences. Like, if you see somebody that's living on the side of a street somewhere, not based on medical issues, based on choices, right? That what you see is such a parsed out version of who they were. They were children. They got brought home from the hospital. They laughed. They had joy. They had happiness, sadness. They were people. But because of their choices, you see them just disintegrating as people. That's 0 to whatever their age they are. Imagine that exact same choice scale over the course of eternity. They would, C.S. Lewis said, you eventually stop grumbling and you become the grumble. That, in my mind, that's what we should expect from a punishment standpoint. Not, I know this kind of gets off track, but the continuation of your choices forever. That God just goes, okay.
It's funny when I think about you can't understand it about heaven. There's almost a feeling of, well, what if I don't like it? But that's completely not
It's
the point.
fundamentally impossible if God exists. It's fundamentally impossible if the God that we believe truly turns out is real, which is our belief, that's our persuasion. It's fundamentally impossible that God could possibly get it wrong.
Yeah. That's what's crazy.
It's actually impossible that God couldn't get it immeasurably better than what we expect. Not only better than we expect, immeasurably better than we could expect. That's who God has to be if God exists.
And it's just like you kind of sit back and you're like, I don't know.
I've heard this. This is not an original statement, but I can't remember who said it. If somebody didn't have a sense of smell, they couldn't smell. No smell whatsoever. And they've never been able to smell. How do you describe what it means to smell? How do you describe that?
Yeah.
You and me could be
Weird.
sitting here talking,
Sure.
and the words that I'm limited because I can't explain it in a way that's going to make sense to somebody who hasn't experienced it, right? And so when God begins to reference heaven, he's kind of like, trust me.
Yeah. That's crazy. Well, I mean, that's all I got.
I mean, I love this. This is getting better. I feel like
I
these
know.
are improving.
Yeah. No, I'm having fun with it too. So like and subscribe and do all that stuff. Put your questions in. And here's a note. You can submit your questions anonymously. So
Absolutely.
it's just a question. We read it. I mean, most of these questions are anonymous. So if you want to do that, just message and just say, hey, don't say my name or whatever, and we'll share it. So
Or you can send in an email and give someone else's name, and we'll pretend that they asked it.
yeah.
No, I was kidding.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. All right. See you guys.